as our Commander-in-Chief, our international relations will not be reduced to a business transaction. I also know that our armed forces will not become an instrument of torture, and they will not be engaged in murder or carry out other illegal activities.
That was retired Marine Corps General John Allen at the Democratic Convention. He served as commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, presidential envoy in the battle against ISIS. As you can see, he's endorsed Hillary Clinton. He joins us now. General Allen, thank you for joining us this morning. You heard Mr. Trump there called you a failed general. The war in ISIS got worse under your leadership. Your response?
Well, George, he has no credibility to criticize me or my record or anything that I have done. If he'd spent a minute in the deserts of Afghanistan or in the deserts of Iraq, I might listen to what he has to say. He's got no credibility. In that regard, there has been progress with respect to the war against ISIS. We knew it was going to be a tough fight, but I don't have to justify myself to him. What we do have to do, George, is listen to what he's been saying about our military. He's called it a disaster. He says our military can't win anymore. That's a direct insult to every single man and woman who's wearing the uniform today. You know, he's talked about needing to torture. He's talked about needing to murder the families of alleged terrorists. He's talked about carpet bombing ISIL. Who do you think is going to get carpet bombed when all of that occurs? It's going to be innocent families.
Let me stop you right there. If indeed Mr. Trump did become president, how would the military respond to those kinds of orders if indeed he followed through on some of the things he said in this campaign?
That's a great question, George, and I think we would be facing a civil military crisis, the like of which we've not seen in this country before. You know, from the moment that those of us who are commissioned, and of course all of our enlisted troops as well, assume the mantle of our responsibility in uniform when we swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution, which is a document and a set of principles and it supports the rule of law. One of those is to ensure that we do not obey illegal orders. It's an inherent responsibility in who we are. And so what we need to do is ensure that we don't create an environment that puts us on a track conceivably where the United States military finds itself in a civil military crisis with a commander-in-chief who would have us do illegal things. Now, my hope would be that the conversation would occur quietly in the Oval Office or somewhere else to advise him not to continue along this track. But, George, that's a major issue that we're facing here, the potential for a civil military crisis where the military could be ordered to conduct illegal activities.
You also heard Mr. Trump say that if he were president, our relationship with Russia would be better, and that would help us in the fight against ISIS.
Well, the Russians haven't helped us at all in the fight against ISIS. When you total up the numbers of sorties that have been going into Syria, aircraft attacks, if you will, going into Syria, when the Russians said they were coming to assist, we got a very small number of Russian sorties. And frankly, they're not dropping precision munitions the way we do. They drop dumb bombs. They drop cluster munitions, which have created huge numbers of civilian casualties. And so when we talk about carpet bombing ISIL, that's what it looks like. Creating huge numbers of civilian casualties, which increases the numbers of refugees flowing out of the region, which increases the misery of the Syrian people. Russians haven't helped us.
I guess Mr. Trump wouldn't disagree with that. What he's saying is that they would if he were president because we'd have a better relationship with Russia.
Well, we'll see. The Russians' self-interests are paramount. And we'll see whether those relations would improve under a Trump presidency.
You know, I was wondering what your reaction was when you were speaking at that convention. We just showed a bite of you at the convention speaking. You had some cheers. There are also a lot of boos from that crowd, from many in the crowd saying no more war, no more war. Does it trouble you at all that it appears that the Democratic Party is very divided over these issues?
George, I didn't detect that there was division at all. In fact, the sense I came away from the floor of that convention was, I mean, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This acclamation, this incredible public acclamation of support for the United States, in support for our military, in support for our veterans, in support for international engagement, in support for using our military in the proper and ways ordained by the Constitution. And when I looked out across the sea of faces in the convention, I couldn't have been more proud to be an American than I was right then, because that acclamation was enormous. And frankly, I didn't hear the no more war. I'm sure they said it. I'm not
they were out there.
Yeah, they were. I'm sure they said it, but what I heard was USA, USA, USA. And I have to tell you, I don't want any more war either, George. None of us wants any more war. We need to have a commander-in-chief who knows what she is doing. We need to have a commander-in-chief that really can lead from the front on these issues, knows how to employ U.S. military and U.S. force, and all the measures of U.S. power, knows how to employ those properly. That's the challenge here. And that's what I think Hillary Clinton can bring to this.
You've seen this exchange between Mr. Trump and the Khan family. How did that hit you?
I couldn't believe it. I simply couldn't believe it. And it was the intersection of, I think, a lot of the worst tendency. You know, this digression to determine why she hadn't spoken. Look, it's not possible to put into words the sense of loss and grief that comes to a family that loses one of their children. And this family is an immigrant family, a Muslim family that's come to the United States with hopes for the future, to be part of the American dream. And they had a son, a handsome young man, who chose to join the finest army in the history of the world, the United States Army. And at his moment of truth, he went forward alone, leaving his troops back to inspect a potential vehicle. It was a suicide vehicle. He was killed. That act of nobility is an incredible act. And for all Americans to understand what that act of nobility was, and to then understand the sense of grief that the families have as a result of that, is really important, George. And she didn't speak because she was grieving. She was weeping as she left the stage. I saw them before, and I saw them afterwards. But the other piece of this that's important is that the family is angry over comments about Islam. The family is angry about comments about Muslims, the vilification of Muslims. And yes, there are problems in the world today. But that kind of language exacerbates the problem. That kind of language radicalizes people. That kind of language puts our troops in danger overseas, and our first responders and our police here at home, it puts them in danger as well. So we need to understand what we're saying matters. These words matter. And that family was humiliated by those comments, and that was an unfair and a shameful thing.
Finally, sir, as you know, so there are many critics of you and other former generals speaking out at political conventions, including the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, writing in the Washington Post. He said as generals, and he was speaking about General Flynn as well, who spoke at the Republican convention, as generals, they have an obligation to uphold our apolitical traditions. They have just made the task of their successors who continue to serve in uniform and are accountable for our security more complicated. It was a mistake for them to participate as they did. It was a mistake for our presidential candidates to ask them to do so. Your response?
Marty Dempsey is one of the greatest soldiers I've ever known, and a dear friend, and I understand completely what he's saying. But I've agonized over this decision over and over again, George, when I listen to this rhetoric, when I worry about the future, when I worry about how this military might be employed, when I hear the denigration of our military. It was not an easy decision for me to come off the bench to make these comments. And I don't intend to remain active in this effort. I wanted to make sure it was very clear that I supported this particular candidate, Hillary Clinton, to be the president and the commander-in-chief, and I decried these comments that put us on a potential track for a civil-military crisis, the like of which we've never seen in this country. That was the reason I came off the bench. I don't intend to stay out there to be politically active. I intend to return to my previous activities.
General Allen, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, George. Always good to see you.